At 2 a.m., while I pretended to sleep, my wife made the biggest mistake of her life. She just didn't know it yet. My name is Trevor Mason. I'm 38 years old and I work as a financial consultant in Phoenix, Arizona. For the past 6 months, I'd been watching my marriage to Sophia slowly unravel, but I never expected it to end with grand theft and a one-way ticket to Europe. I heard her creeping out of bed that Tuesday night, tiptoeing across our hardwood floor with practiced silence. Through half-closed eyes, I watched her carefully extract my wallet from the nightstand, memorize my debit card information, and quietly return it to its place. She thought I was sound asleep. She thought she was being clever. What Sophia didn't know was that I'd been expecting this moment for weeks. The signs had been building since January. Late-night phone calls she'd take in the bathroom. Shopping trips that lasted entire days with bags that never made it home. Most telling were her sudden complaints about our lifestyle, about how her friends were traveling to exotic locations while she was stuck in suburban Phoenix. "Emma just got back from the French Riviera," she'd say, scrolling through social media with obvious envy. "When was the last time we went anywhere exciting?" I'd suggest weekend trips to Sedona or San Diego, but nothing seemed to satisfy her growing restlessness. She wanted Milan, Paris, Rome, destinations that required the kind of money we'd been saving for a down payment on our dream house. The turning point came 3 weeks earlier when I discovered Sophia had been researching European travel extensively. Not family vacation planning, solo trip research, flight costs, luxury hotel rates, high-end shopping districts in major cities. I'd also noticed she'd been asking unusual questions about our finances. How much was in our savings? Did I have other accounts she didn't know about? When did our credit card statements arrive? That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I opened a new checking account and transferred most of our savings there, leaving just enough in the original account to cover monthly expenses. The debit card Sophia had memorized was now connected to an account with exactly $847 remaining. But I didn't stop there. I contacted my bank and set up fraud alerts on the original account. Any transaction over $500 would trigger an immediate notification to my phone and freeze the card pending verification. I also informed them that my wife had access to the account, but might make unauthorized large purchases. The bank representative had been understanding. Marital financial disputes were apparently more common than I'd realized. For 3 weeks, I waited. Sophia continued her secretive behavior, making hushed phone calls and spending hours researching travel websites. She'd grown increasingly distant, treating our conversations like obligations rather than genuine communication. Then came that Tuesday night. After she'd memorized my card information and returned to bed, I lay awake listening to her breathing return to normal. She fell asleep easily, probably dreaming about her upcoming adventure. I waited until morning to check my phone. The first fraud alert had arrived at 3:17 a.m. Attempted charge of $3,200 for airline tickets. The transaction was automatically declined and the card was frozen. More alerts followed throughout the night. Attempted charges for luxury hotels, designer shopping, restaurant reservations, all declined due to insufficient funds and the fraud freeze I'd established. By 6 a.m., I had 17 declined transaction alerts on my phone. If you're enjoying stories about spouses who underestimate their partners, make sure to subscribe, because what happened when Sophia woke up will leave you speechless. I got ready for work as usual, saying nothing about the failed transactions. Sophia seemed unusually cheerful, humming while she made coffee and talking about meeting her sister for lunch. "I might be out late tonight," she said casually. "Rebecca wants to try that new wine bar downtown." I nodded and kissed her goodbye, knowing she wouldn't be meeting Rebecca or visiting any wine bar. At my office, I waited. Around 10 a.m., my phone started buzzing. Sophia's first call came exactly when I expected it. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was frantic. There was something wrong with our debit card. She couldn't make any purchases. Had I noticed any problems? I texted back that I was in meetings all day but would check with the bank later. Her second call was more desperate. She'd gone to our bank branch, but they said the account had been flagged for suspicious activity. They couldn't lift the freeze without speaking to me directly. I replied that I'd call the bank during my lunch break. By afternoon, Sophia's messages had become increasingly panicked. She had important purchases to make. She needed access to our money immediately. Why wasn't I helping her? I finally called her back at 4 p.m. She answered before the first ring finished. "Trevor, thank God. There's something seriously wrong with our account. I can't access any money." I expressed concern and asked what kind of purchases she was trying to make that required our emergency savings. There was a pause before she answered. She claimed she was trying to book a spa weekend for us as a surprise, but the card kept declining. I told her that sounded wonderful, but suggested we discuss major expenses before making them. Perhaps we could plan the spa weekend together when I got home. The disappointment in her voice was unmistakable as she agreed to wait. That evening, I arrived home to find Sophia pacing the living room, her phone pressed to her ear. She was speaking in hushed, urgent tones to someone who clearly wasn't Rebecca. When she saw me, she quickly ended the call. We had dinner in relative silence. Sophia kept checking her phone, growing more agitated with each passing hour. Finally, she excused herself to take a shower. While she was upstairs, her phone buzzed with a text message left on the kitchen counter. The sender was listed as M, and the message read, "Flight leaves tomorrow at 6 a.m. Are you ready?" I took a photo of the message and replaced her phone exactly where she'd left it. When Sophia came back downstairs, she seemed to have reached a decision. She sat next to me on the couch and took my hand. "Trevor, I need to tell you something. I haven't been completely honest about what I want from our marriage." I waited for her to continue. She explained that she felt trapped in our routine, that she needed adventure and experiences we couldn't afford on my consultant salary. She'd been thinking about taking some time apart to figure out what she really wanted. I asked if she'd been planning to tell me this before or after she emptied our savings account to fund a solo trip to Europe. The color drained from her face. She started to deny it, then seemed to realize there was no point. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to protect our actual savings from theft." She stared at me as the implications sank in. The account she'd tried to access contained less than $1,000. The money she'd planned to steal for her European adventure was safely in an account she'd never known existed. Her shock quickly turned to anger. She accused me of trapping her, of being controlling and manipulative. How dare I move our money without telling her? I pointed out that she'd planned to steal our entire savings without telling me, so her moral outrage seemed misplaced. The argument that followed revealed truths we'd both been avoiding for months. Sophia admitted she'd been planning to leave me for someone she'd met through social media, a photographer named Marco who lived in Milan. She'd been corresponding with him for 4 months, sharing details about our finances and making plans to start a new life in Italy. The stolen money was supposed to fund her transition until she could establish herself there. I asked if she'd considered the legal implications of emptying our joint account without permission. She insisted it was her money too, that she had every right to access it. I explained that while she had legal access to the account, taking the entirety of our savings to fund an affair and international relocation could be considered financial misconduct in divorce proceedings. The fight lasted until nearly midnight. Sophia demanded I transfer money to her personal account so she could still make her flight. When I refused, she threatened to take whatever she could find and leave anyway. I reminded her that our only joint account now contained less than $900. Hardly enough for the European lifestyle she'd planned. She stormed upstairs and began packing frantically. I heard her making phone calls, presumably to Marco, explaining that her funding had fallen through. The next morning, Sophia was gone when I woke up. She'd taken her clothes, her jewelry, and the $347 in cash from my wallet. She'd left her wedding ring on the kitchen counter with a note saying she'd send for the rest of her belongings once she got settled. I checked her social media throughout the day, no posts from European airports or Italian cafes. Instead, I found her checked into a budget motel across town. Her grand adventure had been reduced to hiding out in a $59 a night room, trying to figure out her next move without the stolen funds she'd counted on. 3 days later, I received a text asking if we could talk. She'd apparently been in contact with a divorce attorney who'd explained how her attempted theft could impact asset division proceedings. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Sophia looked exhausted and defeated. She asked what it would take for me to not mention the attempted theft in divorce proceedings. She realized she'd made mistakes and wanted to handle our separation amicably. I told her I wasn't interested in punishing her. I just wanted a fair division of our actual assets and a clean break. She agreed to reasonable terms. We'd sell the house and split the proceeds, divide our legitimate savings equally, and handle our own debt. Most importantly, she'd signed documents acknowledging she had no claim to accounts she'd been unaware of during our marriage. The divorce was finalized 2 months later. Sophia moved to Denver to stay with a college friend while she rebuilt her life. The photographer in Milan apparently lost interest once he learned she wouldn't be arriving with a substantial financial cushion. I kept the house and most of our savings, which was fair considering I'd earned the majority of our income throughout the marriage. Sophia received enough to start over, which was more generous than she deserved given her attempted theft. 6 months later, I was reviewing financial statements when I found something interesting. The fraud protection service I'd set up on our old joint account had continued monitoring attempted transactions even after Sophia left. There had been 3 more attempts to access the account using the memorized card information, all from IP addresses in Denver, where Sophia now lived. Old habits apparently die hard. I called the bank and had the old account permanently closed. There was no point in pressing charges, but I wanted to ensure she couldn't cause any future problems. A year after our divorce, I ran into Rebecca, Sophia's sister, at a grocery store. She seemed embarrassed to see me, but stopped to chat. She mentioned that Sophia was struggling financially in Denver, working retail jobs and living in a small apartment. The glamorous European adventure she'd envisioned had never materialized. Rebecca also revealed something I hadn't known. Sophia had borrowed money from several family members before our marriage ended, claiming she needed it for marital counseling and couples therapy. None of that money had been used for counseling. It had all been part of her escape fund. I thanked Rebecca for the information, but didn't ask for details about Sophia's current situation. Her struggles weren't my concern anymore. That evening, I reflected on how different our lives had become. I was thriving professionally, had bought a smaller but more comfortable house, and was dating someone who valued honesty and partnership. Sophia, meanwhile, was learning that stolen money and secret affairs don't lead to the fairy tale endings she'd imagined. The debit card she'd thought would fund her new life had contained just enough money for a tank of gas and a cheap dinner. Her carefully planned escape had been reduced to a few days in a budget motel and a hard lesson about the consequences of betrayal. Sometimes the best revenge isn't elaborate schemes or public humiliation. Sometimes it's simply being prepared for someone's worst impulses and letting them face the natural consequences of their choices. I'd protected what was mine, ended our marriage on reasonable terms, and moved forward with a clear conscience. Sophia had gotten exactly what she'd planned for, a new life away from me. She just hadn't expected it to be quite so expensive or quite so lonely. 2 years later, I was planning my own European vacation, a legitimate one, funded by honest work and careful savings. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I felt no need to share the details on social media. Some adventures are worth keeping private, especially when they're built on a foundation of truth rather than theft.